Chapter 3. Tony stepped out with springs in his knees, and, feeling the waxing heat of the morning, threw back the hood of his parka. The marvelous clear air of an hour earlier was fast disappearing, as the mineral trash that covered Mars' surface began to heat and roil the atmosphere. He looked off toward the Rimrock Hills, mourning their vanished beauty. Then he stopped in surprise, squinting at the enigmatic black bugs crawling back and forth within the shadow of the hills. He stood there, watching, as the seemingly random pattern of motion treaded gradually in the direction of the colony. Who would be out on the desert afoot? He stopped and shielded his eyes. There were about 20 of them, and they were humped with carbines and oxymasks. The military. But why? There'd never been a visit from the Commissioner Bell's little intercolony police force before. Never been any occasion for it. Each colony handled its own internal policing. Tony headed back for the lab as the crooked trail of the soldiers straightened out into a beeline for the same place. He had his patience, but he was also a member of the colony council, and this looked like council business. The delegation was a half-platoon of soldiers, with their carbines and cumbersome oxygen masks and tanks, a choice bit of military conservatism, since a pocket full of oxen pills weighed 100th as much and would keep them alive 100 times longer. There were 2 civilians and an officer, Lieutenant Ed Neely. Tony was relieved to see him. They were fellow members of a subscription club that split the heavy postage on Earthside scientific periodicals, and Tony knew Neely to be a conscientious and level-headed young career officer. The doctor was extending his hand to Neely when he remembered his protocol. One of the civilians was unknown to him, but the other was Hamilton Bell, Commissioner of Interplanetary Affairs. "I'm Tony Hellman, Commissioner," he said. "I don't know if you remember me. I'm the doctor here and a member of our colony's council." "Can you speak for the colony?" he asked abruptly, ignoring Tony's hand. The doctor cast a bewildered look at Lieutenant Neely, whose eyes were front and whose face was set. Tony noticed he carried in a canvas scabbard the disassembled dipple and handle of an electronic bloodhound. "I'm a council member," Tony said. "So is Miss Jonathan here. Another council member's ill and the third is on the way. The 2 of us can speak for the colony. Now, what can we do for you?" "It's a police matter. Do you care to make a statement before I have to drag the situation out into the open?" "Let me take it," muttered O'Donnell. Tony nodded. The lawyer-turned-physicist firmly told the commissioner, "I want to remind you that we are a chartered colony, and under the charter are entitled to police ourselves. And I also want to say that we are not going to respond to any fishing expeditions until we hear what the complaint is." "Suit yourself," grunted the commissioner. "But you're not self-policing when you steal from another colony. Mr. Brenner, tell your story." Eyes swiveled to the other civilian, Brenner, of Brenner Pharmaceuticals. So that, thought Tony, is what a trillionaire looks like. Younger than anyone could reasonably expect, and somehow looking comfortably conservative, even in a parka of orange-red mutation mink. The best of food, plenty of rest, and the most careful attention to his bodily needs were combining to cover the prominent bones of his face with deceptive pads of soft flesh. But he still wore the countenance of a lean and questing man, a perplexing expression of bland good humor or of permanent inner amusement. Brenner shrugged and smiled a little uncomfortably. "I had no choice, Doctor," he said. 100 kilos of my marcane, bulk micron dust, you understand, was stolen yesterday." Somebody gasped. 100 kilograms of marcane, principal product of Brenner's works, was a small fortune on Mars, and a large fortune on Earth, if it could be diverted from medical use and channeled into one of the innumerable pipelines to addicts. "Naturally I reported it," Brenner explained, "and of course Commissioner Bell had to order a bloodhound search. It brought us here." "Ed," Tony appealed to the grim-faced lieutenant. "Did you operate the bloodhound? Will you give me your personal word that it led you to the colony?" "Answer him, Lieutenant," Bell ordered. "I'm sorry to, Dr. Hellman," Neely said stiffly. "I checked the machine 3 times myself. Strong scent from Brenner's storeroom to the Rimrocks, then some confusion in the Rimrock caves, and a weakening scent from the Rimrocks to here. It doesn't actually stand up all the way here, but it doesn't go anywhere else. That's definite." "Please, Dr. Hellman," said Brenner kindly. "You needn't look so stricken. All it means is that there's a rotten apple in your barrel. That happens." Gracie hurried in, a spindle-shanked ex-professor of low-temperature agronomy from Nome University. He addressed himself directly to Brenner. "What are you doing here?" "Mr. Brenner has sworn out an intercolonary complaint of grand theft," said the commissioner. "You're Gracie? You needn't waste your breath trying to blacken Mr. Brenner's character. He's already informed me that there was a disagreement between you, which you've taken to heart." His meager smile showed that what he meant was become a little cracked over. "He hasn't got any character to blacken," growled the ergonomist. "He tried to get me to breed marcane weeds for higher production of his hell dust, and I wanted to know why. Wasn't that naive of me? I checked on Earth, and I found out that maybe 10% of his marcane goes into medical hands, and the rest—" The commissioner shut him up with a decisive, "That's enough. I will not listen to random accusations based on newspaper gossip. I don't doubt that after marcane arrives on Earth, some of it is diverted. The world has its weak-willed people, but Mr. Brenner is a responsible manufacturer, and you people— I respect your ideals, but I'm afraid I can't say much for your performance. The business of Mars is business, and a major theft from one of our leading industrial colonies is very serious indeed." "Gentlemen," said Brenner, "I can't ignore it. I'd like to, simply to spare the unpleasantness, but the amount involved is too important financially, and there's always the danger that some quantity might get into illegal channels." Gracie snarled, looked as though he wanted to spit on the immaculate floor of the lab. "What exactly do you intend to do?" Tony asked hastily, anxious to forestall an eruption from the irritable agronomist. "It should be quite clear by now," Bell replied, "that it is my duty to conduct a search of the premises." "You'll keep your grabbing little hands off our equipment." Unexpectedly, it was Flexner who exploded. "It's all nonsense, and you know it. What will we steal from that drug peddler?" Brenner's quiet laugh rasped into the appalled silence that followed. Flexner, enraged, took just one belligerent step toward the trillionaire and the commissioner. "Sergeant!" barked Lieutenant Neely, and a non-com, unslinging his carbine like an automaton, aimed from the hip at the chemist. Flexner stopped in his tracks, red-faced with anger, and said bitterly, "So we can make the damned stuff and welcome, but all hell breaks loose if somebody hooks it." "For the last time," began Bell, exasperatedly, and then interrupted himself. He drew a paper from his parka and handed it to Tony. "The warrant," he said shortly. Tony passed it to O'Donnell, and there was a long, foot-tapping minute while the ex-lawyer studied the document. At last O'Donnell said, "According to this, you plan to open our shipping crates and break into our process ovens. Is that correct?" He was pale with anger and worry. "Correct," said the commissioner, while Brenner shrugged helplessly. "Marcane could, of course, be concealed from the Bloodhound in lead-insulated containers." "Then you are aware," said Tony, "that we manufacture radioactive materials?" "I am." "And you realize there are certain procedures required by law for handling of such materials?" "Dr. Hellman, has it slipped your mind that I represent the law you're speaking of?" "Don't you realize," Tony pleaded, "that our materials stay below the safety level only because we have a well-established monitoring procedure? If you insist on breaking into process ovens and opening crates without my supervision, Sun Lake cannot assume responsibility for any dangerous radioactivity." "I understand that, Doctor," Bell answered crisply. "Any handling of radioactives in my presence is obviously done on my responsibility, not yours. The Commission, oddly enough, is supplied with its own monitors. I do not believe we will require your assistance. Carry on, Lieutenant." Neely took a reluctant step forward. Choking back his anger, Tony said flatly, "In my opinion, you're exceeding your authority. Your men will interfere with our processing and break open our shipment crates. Our machinery is so delicately adjusted that any kind of handling by untrained people could easily destroy it. And we've spent the last month packing our outgoing shipments for the next rocket. You know what the law is for packing radioactives. If you broke open our shipments, the rocket would be here and gone before we had the stuff decontaminated and repacked. It would be ruinous for the colony." He saw out of the corner of his eye that O'Donnell was unwillingly shaking his head. Bell was the law on Mars, and Bell wasn't even bothering to answer. "At least give us a chance to look into it," urged the doctor. "Maybe we have got a bad apple. We'll find him if we do. You can't wreck us just on suspicion." "More than suspicion is involved here," said Bell. "The findings of the ground tracing device M27, known as the Bloodhound, when operated by a qualified, commissioned officer, are accepted as completely legal evidence in all authorized world courts." They watched bleakly as the lieutenant began to assemble the dipole, handle, power pack, and meters of the Bloodhound. "I have a suggestion," said Brenner. "Under Title 15 of the Interplanetary Affairs Act—" "No," said O'Donnell. "We don't want it." Brenner said persuasively, "If you're clean, there's nothing to worry about." Title 15 was never meant to be applicable to a case like this, O'Donnell crossfired. It's one of those shotgun laws, like a conspiracy count. That's enough, said the commissioner. You can't have it both ways. As long as Mr. Brenner's willing, this is your notice. I'll confirm it in writing. Under Title 15 of the Interplanetary Affairs Act, I advise the Sun Lake Colony that you have until the next shipment day to produce the Marcane thief and the stolen Marcane, or evidence of its disposal. If you fail to do so, I will instruct the military to seal off Sun Lake Colony and a suitable surrounding area for a period of 6 months so that a thorough search can be conducted. Lieutenant, move your men out of here. Neely snapped the half-platoon to attention and marched them through the lab door. The unmilitary figures of the commissioner and the tall, angular drug-maker followed them. O'Donnell's face was grim. It was written in the old days, of 1 shipment a year and never revised, he said. Sealed off means just that. Nobody and nothing in. Nothing and nobody out. But we're geared for 4 ships a year, said Flexner complainingly. Shipment day's only 3 weeks off. Rockets due in 10 days, 2 days unloading, 1 week overhaul, and off she goes. We'd miss the next 2 rockets. We'd miss the next 2 rockets, Tony repeated, dazed. Half a year without shipments coming in, half a year without goods going out. He's trying to strangle us. It can't be legal, objected Flexner. It is. By the time it could be changed, the colony'd be dead anyway. Even if we pulled through, we'd be poison to Earthside buyers, shipments arriving there half a year late. He's trying to strangle us, O'Donnell insisted doggedly. How many oxen pills have we got? What's Bell's angle? What's Brenner out for? Bell's crooked, everybody knows that. That's why they sent him to Mars. But what's his angle? Tony was still a doctor. To no one in particular, he muttered, I've got to check on the baby, and started out again on the road from the lab to the huts with the spring gone from his knees.